turn to our second and final report from the State Auditor's Office regarding fines for human trafficking and sexual exploitation crimes. Please introduce yourselves and launch away.
All right. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Bill Wright. I'm a Senior Performance Auditor with the Office of the Washington State Auditor. I'm here with my colleagues Carly Schmidt and Hannah Yord, both performance auditors with our office. We're here to present the results of our performance audit on fines for human trafficking and sexual exploitation crimes. Before we begin, I'd like to thank those we worked with through the duration of the project for their information and assistance. This includes King County Superior Court, Pierce County Superior Court, Kent Municipal Court, and their associated clerks. We also want to thank King County, Pierce County, and the City of Kent. The Department of Commerce and the Administrative Office of the Courts were also helpful, so thanks to them as well. Human trafficking is an illegal trade of exploiting other people, often those who are more vulnerable. Washington state law imposes mandatory fines on people who commit human trafficking. It imposes similar fines on those who commit related sexual exploitation crimes, such as commercial sexual abuse of a minor. Fines make those who exploit other people responsible for contributing financially to local efforts to address these crimes and support survivors. The box on this slide shows the 10 crimes in the scope of our audit. All of these crimes must follow a similar process under state law, which I'll describe next. Jurisdictions must follow a multi-step process to administer fines. First, courts assess fines on offenders. This may be in Superior, District, or Municipal Court, depending on the crime. Then clerks of the court collect the fines from offenders. This money is then sent to the local government where the offense occurred for deposit in the general fund. Finally, the counties, cities, or towns must use the money from fines for enforcement activities, prevention efforts, such as education programs for offenders, or rehabilitative services for survivors, such as housing and counseling. However, at every step in the process for administering fines, there is risk that some money will not reach its intended purpose. The key results from our audit show that courts assessed fines inconsistently. While clerks collected some fines, collection rates varied, and some revenues were not sent to the correct local government. Local governments varied in whether they used fine revenues to address these crimes and support survivors. We conducted this audit because there have been concerns and reports that jurisdictions are not administering these fines and revenues as required. For example, Washington's Department of Commerce produces annual reports for the legislature, which provides a high-level statewide picture of sexual exploitation fines. The reports show that jurisdictions may not always be assessing, sending, or using fine revenues as required. A provision in Senate Bill 6006, passed by the legislature in 2024, required our office to conduct a performance audit examining human trafficking fines. We decided to also examine fines for related sexual exploitation crimes, as they are much more common and must follow a similar process. This audit determined whether selected jurisdictions were assessing, collecting, and using fines for human trafficking and sexual exploitation crimes as required by law. To answer our audit questions, we selected 3 courts and their associated clerks and 3 corresponding local governments. We reviewed fines and revenues for the period of calendar years 2018 through 2023. I'll now hand off the presentation to Carly to discuss our audit results for the assessment and collection and remittance of fines.
Good afternoon, Carly Schmidt, a performance auditor on this project. We first examined whether audited courts were assessing fines as required by state law and found that some fines were not assessed. We found that courts assessed human trafficking and sexual exploitation fines but did so inconsistently. Our analysis of court data showed that Kent Municipal Court assessed fines in 79% of its cases where fines were required. King County Superior Court did so in 54% of its cases, and Pierce County Superior Court did so in 40% of its cases. Focusing just on human trafficking, we found that fines were consistently assessed for those cases. Human trafficking is a felony, so it's heard only by superior courts. King and Pierce Superior Courts had a total of 12 human trafficking cases and assessed fines on all 12. In total, for all relevant crimes, the 3 courts assessed $556,000 in fines for cases resolved during 2018 to 2023. However, in cases with no fines assessed, they could have assessed an additional $57,000 to $170,000, but did not. This range reflects the fact that state law allows courts to waive fines by up to 2/3 if the offender does not have the ability to pay. Our interviews and research revealed 3 commonly mentioned reasons why courts statewide might not assess these required fines. First, judges are responsible for assessing fines, but they often rely on prosecutors to recommend them. If the prosecutor does not recommend a fine, the judge also may not assess it. Also, judges and prosecutors may be unaware of the fines if these crimes are relatively rare in their jurisdiction. Even where such crimes are more common, prosecutors may lack awareness of the related fines unless they're part of a specialized unit. And finally, broader changes in legal philosophy around fines may minimize their use, even when mandatory. Over the last decade, legislators have revised certain laws to reduce or eliminate other types of fines out of concern that they unjustly criminalize poverty and disproportionately affect people of color. Education could help judges and prosecutors understand that fines for certain crimes are still mandatory. Next, we examined whether fines were collected and sent to the correct local government where the offense occurred, and we found this was not always the case. Regarding collections, our analysis of court data found that while clerks collected some fines, collection rates varied depending on the court and crime. Specifically, rates were lower for superior courts and for human trafficking cases. Kent Municipal Court collected more than 90% of fines assessed, while clerks at King and Pierce County Superior Courts collected roughly half the fines assessed. And just to note, we did find reports that suggested superior courts have lower collection rates for fines more broadly compared to other court types. We also found that collection rates for human trafficking fines were low. Less than 10% of fines assessed for this crime were collected at both superior courts. We learned of several challenges that contribute to low collection rates statewide through our interviews and research. This included the fact that many offenders may not have the ability to pay their fines. Also, clerks may not be able to collect fines from offenders with long prison sentences. And finally, some recent legislative changes have made collections more challenging, such as a 2022 bill that reduced the timeline for collecting fines. Most of the fines that are collected must then be sent to the correct local government. This is so counties, cities, or towns can use the money to support local efforts to address these crimes and support survivors. However, we learned that some fine revenues from King and Pierce Superior Courts incorrectly went to their county instead of to cities or towns or the state general fund. Incomplete forms and incorrect coding contributed to fines not being sent correctly. Court forms sometimes lacked sufficient detail about fines, including the pertinent state law, the appropriate code, or the proper recipient of revenues. Without such information, clerks did not know how to correctly code fines in their financial systems, and as a result, some revenues were incorrectly coded and sent to the wrong government. I'll now pass off the presentation to Hannah to share our audit results about how fine revenues were used and our audit recommendations.
Good afternoon. I'm Hannah Yord, a performance auditor on this project. In the last portion of our audit, we looked at whether local governments use fine revenues as required by state law to address these crimes and support survivors for the audit period of 2018 to 2023. We found that local governments varied in whether they used fine revenues as required and that some money was unused in general funds. We found that the City of Kent used fine revenues as required. Kent received $241,000 in fine revenue and spent $145,000 on law enforcement efforts, including trainings for officers, overtime for sting operations, and other expenses for sting operations and to support survivors, such as food and hotel rooms. Kent also donated revenue to groups serving survivors. Staff said that reduced resources and staffing prevented them from using all the money during the audit period, but they have since been making efforts to resume operations and have made subsequent donations. Kent had a robust process for using fine revenues that included tracking spreadsheets, procedures, and an approval process to ensure fine revenues were used properly. We found that King County appeared to use fine revenues as required. The King County Superior Court Clerk's Office reported that $115,000 in fine revenue was sent to the county. The county reported spending significantly more than that, at least $1.1 million, on relevant investigations by the Sheriff's Office and activities conducted by the Commercially Sexually Exploited Children Program related to prevention efforts and survivor services. Staff said fine revenues were deposited into the county's general fund, with general fund money distributed to support these activities. However, staff said they did not track or monitor whether fine revenues were used for specific activities. Although King County reported spending much more than it collected in fine revenue, it risks not complying with state law in the future if it does not have a way to ensure it is using fine revenues appropriately. For example, if revenues increase or relevant spending drops, the county risks leaving money unused or used for other purposes. Finally, we found that some revenue was unused in general funds. Pierce County reported receiving about $64,000 in fine revenues, and according to staff, this money was unused in the general fund. The county had not established a way to track whether fine revenues were used for specific purposes in its financial system. This may also be happening in jurisdictions across the state. The Department of Commerce conducts surveys as part of its annual reporting process for sexual exploitation fines. Many local governments surveyed said that fine revenues collected in the most recent fiscal year were unused in the general fund. We made a series of recommendations to audited jurisdictions to improve the administration of human trafficking and sexual exploitation fines, which we've summarized here. To ensure fines are consistently assessed, we recommended all 3 courts work with prosecutors to improve awareness and understanding of fines. And just to note, we recently spoke with the Administrative Office of the courts, and they are developing tools that courts across the state may find helpful for this purpose. Then, for relevant departments in King and Pierce County, we recommended they ensure their business processes, codes, and templates are set up appropriately so fines are sent to the correct local government, and that they establish or strengthen their processes for ensuring fine revenues are used for enforcement, prevention, and survivor services as required. While our recommendations are targeted to audited jurisdictions, we also include guidance for all jurisdictions in Washington. Reports from the Department of Commerce indicate other jurisdictions across the state may also not be assessing, sending, or using fine revenues as required. As a result, we suggest that other jurisdictions in Washington implement our recommendations if needed. By doing so, all jurisdictions could help increase the amount of funding that is directed toward addressing these crimes and supporting survivors. That concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Pardon my saying this, but that was a fine presentation.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or better puns on tap from anyone online? In that case, I have 2 quick questions. One is, for all counties and cities collecting the fines, is this something that the state auditor's office in its financial audits would then start reviewing to make sure that fines that are collected are appropriately used in your wearing your other hat?
That is not something we have discussed internally, so we can definitely discuss that and get back to you.
That just seems kind of logical, and if you're providing guidance, then there'd be no excuse for counties and cities not to follow that in terms of tracking and appropriately using it and knowing that you'll be looking. And I can't remember what my other question was, but that's if you'd let us know.
Of course.
Appreciate that. That's it then for we don't have anyone signed up for testimony on this, or has the person from the prior testimony rejoined?
No, but even Sutton
Oh, we do have?
is online from
Okay.
King County.
Oh, thank you very much. Eben, would you like to respond?
Good afternoon. Yes, my name's Eben Sutton. I am the chief accountant at King County and audit liaison to the Washington State Auditor's Office. Mostly I wanted to be here today to answer any questions that came up, but while I'm here, I wanted to express appreciation to the State Auditor's Office, not only for doing the audit, but the way that they conducted the audit. They were incredibly flexible with us as we exchanged a fair amount of data back and forth between the two organizations and consistently took into account the other activities that were happening in the county. So very much appreciate that. And appreciate, with respect to the audit report, appreciate the recognition of all the work that's happening at King County on human trafficking prevention and survivor support programs.
Thank you. Thanks for bearing with us and sharing the county's perspective today. With that, I'm not seeing any hands up, so that will conclude today's I-900 subcommittee hearing. And again, thank you to the State Auditor's Office for the work on these audits and continued dialogue on implementation from the legislature.